You probably know the feeling. Someone says, "I'll stop by for a quick visit." And instead of excitement, you feel a pit in your stomach. Not because you dislike the person, not because you're antisocial, but because something about the whole idea feels draining. You're not alone. In fact, Carl Jung understood this better than most. For people with active inner lives, those who think deeply, feel intensely, and live in constant dialogue with their own mind, social interactions aren't neutral. They're energetic exchanges, and these exchanges can cost more than they give. Introversion isn't shyness, it's sensitivity to input. Jung's theory of psychological types introduced the world to introversion and extroversion not as quirks, but as core orientations. Extroverts draw energy from the outer world. Introverts draw energy from within. So when a visitor enters your space, your sanctuary of silence, they're not just showing up. They're bringing energy, their thoughts, their pace, their emotional weather. And suddenly your calm inner world is flooded with external noise. Even if the visitor is polite, even if the conversation is pleasant, you're no longer anchored in yourself. You're reacting, managing, adjusting. For the introverted mind, this isn't trivial. It's an intrusion. Why small talk feels like a psychic attack? Let's be blunt. Most casual visits are filled with surface-level chatter. How's work? Did you see the news? Let me tell you what happened at the store. This kind of interaction is fine for people who swim on the surface of life. But if you're someone who lives in the depths, who questions meaning, contemplates mortality, observes human behavior with philosophical detachment, small talk feels absurd. It's like trying to explain a dream to someone who's never slept. There's a mental gear shift required, one that feels jarring. You have to suppress your internal world just to meet the visitor in theirs. And often, their world isn't one you want to stay in for long. The cost of performance. Why being social drains you. Most intelligent or highly introspective people aren't socially awkward. They can smile, hold a conversation, even entertain. But that performance comes at a price. You're not just being friendly. You're constructing a version of yourself for them to interact with. You're filtering your thoughts, monitoring your tone, making sure you're not too weird, too intense, too silent. It's not inauthentic, but it's labor. And by the time they leave, you don't feel fulfilled. You feel depleted. Not because anything went wrong, but because for the last hour you haven't been you. You've been the host, the mirror, the interpreter. Jung, the inner life is a sacred space. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries a deep inner landscape filled with symbols, archetypes, and meaning-making processes. For people who are in tune with that inner world, solitude isn't loneliness. It's a return to wholeness. When someone enters your space, they disrupt that inner process. Even if they mean well, even if they love you, it's not their fault. But it's also not your responsibility to pretend it doesn't affect you. This isn't about arrogance, it's about psychic boundaries. If your inner life is rich, nuanced, and sensitive, you have to protect it, or you'll spend your days putting out chairs for visitors in a house that's meant to be yours. Here's a paradox most people can't grasp. The more depth you carry inside you, the more likely you are to feel alone in a room full of people. Not because you're antisocial, but because most people aren't speaking from the same depth. They're not asking the same questions. They're not haunted by the same truths. So when they talk, it feels like static, not connection. This is the silent grief of the intelligent, the philosophical, the self-aware. They long to be seen, but they're surrounded by people who don't know how to look that far in. Jung and the extroverted society. Carl Jung observed that Western culture idealizes the outward life, productivity, sociability, achievement, appearances. It's a world made by and for extroverts. And in that world, the introverted or deeply introspective person often feels off. You're told to get out more, to open up, to stop overthinking. But what they call overthinking is just thinking. What they call being in your head is where you actually live. So you try to meet them halfway. You try to play the social game, but every time you do, a piece of you goes quiet, until eventually your soul starts whispering, "You don't belong here." And that whisper is right, the isolation of insight. When you see through things, social masks, power games, hidden agendas, you stop taking people at face value. You start noticing the performance in conversation, the unconscious manipulation, the lack of self-awareness, and it becomes exhausting to pretend you don't see it. You nod, you smile, but inside, you feel like an outsider watching a theater play from behind the curtain. And what's worse, you start to question whether you are the problem, whether your sensitivity is a flaw, whether your preference for solitude is just social failure in disguise. But here's the truth Jung would tell you. You're not broken. You're simply awake in a world that's half asleep. Why even nice people can be overwhelming. Here's a hard truth. Someone doesn't have to be toxic to drain you. They can be kind, well-meaning, even loving, and still be too much. 'Cause it's not about them. It's about your energetic bandwidth. Every person brings not just words, but emotional noise, their unspoken anxieties, their pace, their unprocessed tension. And if you're perceptive, if you feel what's not being said, you absorb all of it. You laugh at their jokes while your body is quietly screaming for silence. You maintain eye contact while your nervous system starts to fray. And when they leave, you sit down, you breathe, and it feels like your soul is returning to your body. Solitude is self-repair. In solitude, you're not avoiding others, you're returning to yourself. You stop performing, stop filtering, stop anticipating someone else's emotional needs. You come back into your natural rhythm, your thoughts, your sensations, your unspoken inner dialogue. This isn't escapism, this is self-maintenance. Jung would argue that for the introverted intuitive type, one of the rarest types in his psychological system, solitude isn't a preference, it's oxygen. It's where clarity returns, where inspiration flows, where your inner compass recalibrates. Without it, you lose yourself, slowly, silently, politely. Not all visitors affect you the same way. Some people walk into your space and immediately harmonize with your energy. They sit in silence comfortably. They speak with awareness. They don't require performance. They don't bring chaos. And after they leave, you feel refreshed. But others, they come in like a storm. They overshare, overstay, oversaturate the room with their unresolved emotions. They talk at you, not with you. They mistake availability for interest, and they view your stillness as an invitation to dump. To the average person, this might be mildly annoying, but to someone highly intelligent, intuitive, or psychologically attuned, it's a full-blown energetic invasion. Jung's warning, the unconscious projects, it's garbage. Carl Jung made one thing very clear. What people don't deal with internally, they will project externally. And when you're perceptive, you feel that projection happening in real time. You sense the insecurity behind their bragging. You feel the pain buried under their humor. You notice the contradiction between their words and their body language. It's not that you're being judgmental, you're just aware. But awareness has a cost. Now you're holding their unconscious material for them. Their sadness, their frustration, their loneliness. And if you don't have strong inner boundaries, it clings to you after they leave. Emotional dumping versus authentic connection. There's a big difference between someone who's emotionally open and someone who uses you as their unpaid therapist. Intelligent people tend to attract the second kind because they listen deeply. They don't interrupt. They reflect instead of react. To emotional vampires, this feels like paradise. They mistake your empathy for consent. They think, finally, someone who gets me. And suddenly you're trapped in a 90-minute monologue about their breakup, their job, their trauma. Meanwhile, your mind is screaming, I didn't agree to this. But you stay quiet because you don't want to be rude, because you've been trained to prioritize other people's comfort over your own boundaries. And that's where it starts, the slow erosion of your inner peace, one polite nod at a time. Why highly perceptive people need fierce boundaries. Here's a painful truth. If you don't create boundaries, you will become a dumping ground. Not just emotionally, psychically. You'll carry fragments of other people's chaos for days. You'll replay their stories in your mind. You'll feel heavy for no clear reason. You'll start avoiding connection altogether, not because you hate people, but because you haven't learned how to filter who gets access to you. Jung would say, your unconscious is constantly picking up on what others are trying to hide. And unless you take command of your inner environment, you'll spend your life absorbing everyone else's mess like a psychic sponge. The guilt trap. Why saying no feels so hard. Most intelligent people struggle to say no, not because they can't, but because they've been taught that kindness means always being available. You think, they'll be offended if I don't let them come over. They'll think I don't care if I don't listen. They're going through something. I should be there for them. And so you overextend. You let people into your space, your schedule, your energy field, even when your intuition screams, don't. This guilt is rooted in an old lie. That being good means being open. But openness without discernment isn't virtue. It's self-abandonment. Let's make something clear. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about deciding who gets to come close. There's a big difference between being closed off and being selective with your energy. Intelligent people, especially those who feel deeply, struggle with this distinction. They don't want to hurt anyone. They don't want to seem cold. They don't want to lose relationships. But here's the truth Jung would tell you. If you don't respect your inner world, no one else will. The art of selective access. Not everyone deserves equal access to you. This isn't arrogance, it's energetic hygiene. You don't leave your front door wide open to strangers. Why would you do that with your mind? Some people bring clarity. Others bring confusion. Some uplift, others drain. The more sensitive or insightful you are, the more intentional you must be about who you allow near your inner life. Because your inner world is not a public park, it's a sacred space, and every visitor leaves a footprint. Types of visitors and what they cost you. Think about the people who most often drop by. The overtalker, the energy dumper, the crisis seeker, the bored wanderer, the gossip merchant. They don't always show up with malice, but they do show up with need. They want your time, your ear, your emotional bandwidth, your attention. And if you're not careful, you'll give it away until there's none left for yourself. This is especially dangerous for the intelligent introvert because your clarity depends on solitude. When that solitude is constantly interrupted, your sense of self begins to dissolve. The cost of constant access. You ever notice how your best thoughts happen when you're alone? How your deepest insights arrive in the silence? When no one's talking at you, needing you, performing for you. That's not a coincidence, that's alignment. But most people live in the opposite state. They're always available, always on, always trying to be liked. And slowly, they become strangers to themselves. The truth is, every interruption costs you something. Your mental flow, your emotional balance, your clarity of thought, your access to unconscious insight. If you're constantly reacting to others, you're no longer in dialogue with yourself. And that's a recipe for burnout disguised as social life. How to say no without feeling like the bad guy. It's not just about saying no, it's about saying yes to yourself. Here are a few ways to start setting those boundaries without self-sabotage. Pre-frame your availability. I'm working on something important, so I won't be available for calls or visits this weekend. No drama, just clarity. Give short, honest reasons. I need some alone time to recharge. I'll reach out when I'm free. No guilt, no over-explaining. Protect your space without apology. I'm not up for visitors right now. Period. You don't owe anyone a justification. The people who respect this, they're your people. The ones who don't, they were just using your openness for their own emotional convenience. Jung, wholeness requires withdrawal. Carl Jung emphasized that becoming whole requires periods of withdrawal. You must go inward, confront your thoughts, listen to what your unconscious is trying to say. You can't do that if someone's talking over your intuition. You can't do that if your schedule is packed with shallow connection. You can't do that if every time you sit down, someone else needs you. Your growth depends on space, and that space needs to be guarded. At some point, you realize this. Most people are not asking how you are. They're just looking for somewhere to put their noise. They don't mean harm, but they don't mean you either. They're not really present. They're scanning for comfort, distraction, validation. And if you're open and self-aware, they see you as the perfect sponge. But what happens when you stop soaking it all in? When you stop giving your time to people who never earned your attention? When you stop letting the world knock on your door? Just because it knows you'll answer? Something shifts. Your mind clears. Your body relaxes. Your ideas return. You remember who you are underneath the noise. The world won't give you silence. You have to take it. Let's be brutally honest. If you wait for life to give you peace, you'll die waiting. People will keep calling. Messages will keep coming. Visitors will keep showing up just for a quick minute. The modern world feeds on access. Unlimited access. Unfiltered connection. No boundaries, no pause, no breath. And if you don't stand up to that with fierce clarity, you will disappear into it. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires periods of retreat. Not as escapism, but as integration. You withdraw not to escape others, but to reclaim the pieces of yourself you gave away. Your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's your compass. You feel too much because you see too much. You notice shifts in tone. You hear what's not being said. You sense emotional undercurrents others are blind to. That's not dysfunction. That's awareness. And awareness, without protection, becomes suffering. You are not too sensitive. You are too unprotected in environments not built for your depth. What feels like social fatigue is often empathic overload. What looks like disinterest is often misalignment. You're not antisocial. You're anti-superficial. You're not aloof. You're just tuned to a different frequency. Build a life that honors your mind. If you want to thrive as a deeply intelligent, intuitive, or philosophical person, you must architect your life around your internal rhythm. This means blocking time for thought like others block meetings. Treating solitude as sacred, not optional. Designing your space to reflect your values, not society's noise. Being brutal about boundaries and graceful in enforcing them. Choosing depth over popularity, peace over access. Because here's the thing, you were not built to live at the surface. You were not designed for constant interruption. You were not meant to shrink your energy just to fit into shallow interactions. Jung's final lesson, guard the gateway. In Jungian psychology, the self is sacred, the innermost core of who you are. Beyond roles, beyond masks, beyond expectations. And access to that self must be earned, not given freely to anyone who knocks. Not everyone should be allowed in your space. Not everyone should be invited into your world. Not everyone should be handed your attention just because they ask for it. You are not obligated to play host to the world's chaos. You are obligated to become yourself, and that requires silence, solitude, and a refusal to open the door to anything that doesn't nourish your becoming. If this message resonated, share it with someone who's been giving away their peace without even realizing it. Let them know their sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's a superpower. And their solitude, it's not a retreat, it's a revolution.